Now, the other way people get exposed is by inhaling radioactive elements into their lungs and by eating radioactive food. So when these elements like strontium-90, which actually emits beta radiation, which is just a little electron particle, but it's very carcinogenic, and strontium-90 lasts for 600 years, or cesium-137, which irradiates various parts of the body, that emits high levels of gamma radiation when it's inside you, and beta radiation, or plutonium, which emits alpha radiation, which is very carcinogenic. If they land on the soil, and they've landed on the soil all over Fukushima Prefecture and in many, many parts of Japan, what happens is that the roots of the plants don't know these elements are radioactive, and they suck them up and concentrate them 10, 100 or 1,000 times in the food, in the leafy vegetables like spinach, in the tea, and in the rice. And cesium is being found in the rice in Fukushima Prefecture. I think half the rice in Japan is grown in Fukushima Prefecture. This is an absolute disaster. And so the elements are concentrated from the radiation in the soil up into the plants. And then what happens if the plants or the radioactive rice hay, for instance, is fed to cattle, then the cesium and the strontium and the like are concentrated further in the milk in the cows. And then a baby might drink that radioactive milk. And then the strontium-90 and the cesium go through the breast of the mother if she's lactating. And as they pass through the breast, they can mutate genes which later on can cause the woman to develop breast cancer. And the baby, who is so sensitive to radiation, drinks milk containing strontium-90 or cesium-137. The strontium-90 is like calcium, and it goes to the bone. And that's where the blood cells are formed, and it's where the bone cells are formed. And the baby's growing, the bones are growing. And so as the cells are rapidly dividing, so they're sensitive to being hit by beta radiation from the strontium-90, mutation of the regulatory genes, and that child later could develop, as it grows, either bone cancer or leukemia, which is cancer of the white blood cells which are made in the bone marrow. Or the cesium-137 goes through the breast, possibly mutating genes in the cells of the breast, so the woman may later develop breast cancer. And cesium is like potassium, and potassium goes to all the cells in the body. It's very ubiquitous. And cesium-137 can cause brain cancer, muscle cancers called rhabdomyosarcomas. It can go to the ovaries and mutate genes in the eggs and in the testicles, in the sperm, or produce testicular cancer later, or ovarian cancer. Cesium-137 lasts for 600 years. It's a gamma emitter. So when it's in the body, say there's some cesium-137 in the brain, and it just sits in the brain for a long time, months, years, irradiating a small volume of cells with gamma radiation and beta radiation, those cells get a really high dose of radiation. So when you hear the authorities in Japan saying, oh, it's okay, we'll give you 2 rems a year or 200 millirems a year and that's okay, they're only talking about external gamma radiation that I described previously, that comes from ground shine from the radioactive elements on the ground, or if you're enveloped in radioactive cloud. They're not talking about the internal emitters which irradiate a few cells to cause cancer. And that's the real problem with what the authorities in Japan, TEPCO, the Japanese government, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and others do not understand, and it's called radiation biology, radiobiology. Now, if you inhale, say, plutonium, which is almost the most toxic material known, it's an alpha emitter, and it emits a tiny particle made of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. And the little tiny hot spot of plutonium sits in your lung, irradiating a tiny volume of cells with alpha radiation, which is intensely mutagenic. Most cells die in that area, But as the radiation decreases with the square of the distance on the periphery of that volume, cells survive. And the genes, the regulatory genes, mutate, and that cell which is damaged later will turn into a cancer cell in the lung. And so those cells get a really high dose. But what the IAEA does is average that dose over the whole of the two lung fields to say, oh, the dose is really low. But that's not how radiation biology works. That's not how physiology works. It's the affected cells that cause the cancer, and they're affected by really high doses of radiation. Now, these things that get into you, and then there's radioactive iodine, of course, that lasts on you for about 10 weeks. But, you know, the children are being tested now for radioactive iodine, or they have been in the past, and their cells in their thyroid may have been damaged by beta radiation, that electron emitted from the radioactive iodine, and gamma radiation. And those children, many of whom, I'm afraid, are destined to develop thyroid cancer in the future, as children did when they were exposed after Chernobyl in Belarus and the Ukraine and the like. It's very, very, very serious. And everybody within the area of the radioactive plume that went to the northwest of Japan, and then it went down to Tokyo and the like, should have been evacuated, and should now still be evacuated, because the radiation levels are still very high in some areas. Now, the food. You must not eat radioactive food, because that's how the cesium and the strontium and the radioactive iodine get into your bodies, because the elements are concentrated in food. And I've only mentioned a few of about 100 elements that escaped. Ruthenium, carbon-14, tritium, radioactive iron, cobalt-60 that got out of that reactor, and they're only measuring cesium-137 at the moment and cesium-134, and maybe some plutonium. So what the Japanese government should be doing is routinely measuring food, and any radioactive food should be banned. I hear that they're actually canning radioactive food and sending it to third world countries, which is really criminal. A, the food should be monitored consistently so you know what you're feeding your children. B, everybody, particularly women who are of reproductive age and children, should be evacuated from any radioactive areas. And I don't care how much it costs. That's what should be happening. The other thing is that they are finding a huge amount of radioactive material in sewage, which is coming from the nuclear power plant at Fukushima, and is also going into the sewage systems as there's a lot of radiation around. And what the Japanese government is doing, God help them, is that they're combining that radioactive sewage with non-radioactive sewage. So they say, oh, it's okay, we're diluting it, and they're incinerating it. So by burning it in incinerators, up go the radioactive elements. They're not destroyed, they just get dispersed into the air to be deposited once again, depending on the wind direction, on the soil, to be reconcentrated in food. And so it goes on. And for people who are walking along and they are enveloped in a cloud of incinerated waste, to be inhaling this material. And as I've just described, you can't fix radiation by dilution, because it gets reconcentrated by orders of magnitude at each step of the food chain. For instance, huge amount of radioactive material has been tipped into the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Massive amounts, like nothing ever we've experienced in history in the nuclear age, more than at Chernobyl. And the radioactive elements, like, say, cesium-137, concentrates in the algae by orders of magnitude, then in the crustaceans by orders of magnitude, and then a little fish by orders of magnitude, then the big fish. And Japanese love fish, right? You love your sushi and sashimi. You must not eat any fish or any seaweed. Seaweed concentrates these elements very avidly. Without having it tested, you must not eat radioactive food, because it will end up in your body, and many of you will be destined to develop cancer. I can't tell you how serious this is. So The solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious when it comes to radiation, and that's for incineration, that's for tipping it in the ocean, that's for anything they do with it, because it just gets reconcentrated back in the biological cycle in the food chain. And we as human beings stand at the apex of the food chain, the apex of that pyramid. So these elements concentrate most highly in human bodies. I don't think I need to say any more. I am available for questions. Also, if you read my book, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, now I think it probably should be translated into Japanese, and also my other book, Nuclear Madness, What You Can Do, those two books, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer and Nuclear Madness, you will learn much more about what I've just said. There are more facts to be enumerated, so you will understand. And it's imperative that you, as citizens of Japan, now understand what is happening to you, that you take on your government and TEPCO, because the government is protecting TEPCO and not the people of Japan. I have to say that the Russians were more vigilant in evacuating people from radiation zones than your government has been. And you must close down every single reactor in Japan because of the earthquakes and the damage that can occur. And you must move away from nuclear power into renewable sources of energy like tidal power, wind power, solar power, which works even in the middle of winter. And Japan could become an energy superpower of the world if it puts its talents and technological abilities into developing renewable energies which are available now and could provide all the energy that Japan needs in the future. And I will end by saying that I know that you've had to tighten your belts in Japan by conserving energy because you haven't had 6 reactors at Fukushima. So don't use electricity voraciously. Be very careful with it. I think you're showing the world that conservation can really work. I have a lot of respect. I really respect you people in Japan. My heart goes out to particularly the mothers and the children and the babies and babies yet to be born. You need to know that cesium lasts for 600 years, so it's not going to go away. That strontium-90 lasts 600 years. That plutonium lasts for 500,000 years. And it has been emitted from those reactors. You need to know that the accident is not over. They are not in cold shutdown, those reactors. 3 meltdowns, a cooling pool at great risk in Unit 4. So all reactors must be closed in Japan. You must insist that the government evacuate all people from areas that are highly contaminated to the south. And I really wish you luck and a lot of love. Thank you.